All right, and we'll do a little something different this time for my video about this lens or this type of gear review, whatever you want to call this. It's more of an overview and my thoughts on this lens after having used it for a few weeks. So this is the Viltrox 75mm f1.2 for the Nikon Z mount. It's also available in the Fuji X mount and the Sony E mount. It's been available for Fuji for a few weeks already, maybe a couple months. And there's also been some firmware updates for this lens from Fuji. So you're looking at it here on the Nikon Z8. Just show you this here real quick, and then you can get into a little more detail. But let's look here real quick. There's a USB-C port here on the back of the lens, and you can use that for firmware updates if there's any updates available, which they release updates sometimes to increase or improve focus performance and fix bugs and so on. He has a nice red seal here if you're interested in red seals instead of black seals. Just kidding, but it's sealed, in other places throughout the lens. This is Viltrox's Pro Series lens. So if you look at the a diagram of the lens here, it's has several seals in it. So back to the lens itself, it does have a autofocus manual focus switch here on the side. This button on the side is not a custom function button. It's just a focus lock button, which I personally would probably never use. So the focus ring here, which is kind of a rubbery material, and the metal aperture ring. On the other side, there is a declick button for the switch for the aperture ring. So if you turn it off, it's not going to click, and if you turn it on, it will click. It's not a really obnoxious, loud clicking. It's just kind of a softer click. But if you're depending on the microphone you're using, if it's near the camera, you may hear that. So you can turn it off and during video, and then you turn that off, and you won't hear the clicking. So let's just go back over the lens real quick here. So this is a 77mm filter thread on the front. This is kind of a bigger lens, and this is my Z8 right there. So you can see what it looks like on the Z8, and it does look more appropriate on the Z8 compared to the ZFC, for example, which is here. So there's side view of my Nikon ZFC with the Viltrox 75 f1.2 on there. Now this lens, 75mm on an APS-C camera or on a full frame camera, it's going to look equivalent to a 112.5mm focal length lens, and 1.2 you're still going to get the 1.2 for the light gathering, but this lens on a full frame or on a APS-C camera, it's going to give you the appearance of like a 112mm lens at a depth of field of 1.8. So just something to keep in mind. But at 1.8 at 112mm is really shallow. So there's really not a lot to talk about as far as the lens itself. As far as construction, it is metal. There's a lot of glass in there, so it's not a really lightweight lens. You can look up the specs yourself. I don't need to go over all that here. And nice plastic lens hood on. It's got the pedal type lens hood. This is the box that would come in. Again, this is the Nikon Z mount, and this is again the mount for the lens. And again, this is a fully autofocusing lens. You can see the electrical contacts there, and again, a firmware update port there. So this does work for also autofocusing works well during video. I have a sample video I'll put in the description down below, so you can look at that, and we'll look at some of these pictures here. Okay, so let's look at here. So something to keep in mind about these pictures is these are raw photos from my Nikon Z8, and they are edited to my taste, so there may be a vignette around the outside, which is totally intentional. And just so you know, I didn't notice any obnoxious, vignetting wide open on this. There's a little bit, but it's not, it's not bad at all. It's not even what I would call a lot. And I like to add a little vignette around some of my photos, depending on what it is, because it helps draw your interest into the other parts of the photos where the actual subject is. So if we look at this 100%, now I'm going to turn off 100% viewing on this website on my gallery for this lens after I'm done with this, but you won't be able to zoom in 100%, but you can look at it here. What is this? This is at f2. So over here also, What I was saying is I'm going to turn off, you can still view them large, but you just won't be able to zoom in 100% in this gallery that I have for this lens. But if you look over here at the I button, when you zoom in on an image and make it bigger, when you click on it, make it bigger, you'll see all the details about the picture, the camera that it was shot with, um, the aperture, shutter speed, and all that kind of stuff, if you want to see that. So um, these are some pictures when I was out in Washington, the east of Seattle, out in the Snoqualmie and North Bend area, because I was shooting some Twin Peaks filming locations photos. So this is 2.8 aperture, and again, everything looks really good here to me as far as sharpness, just general image quality, optical quality with this lens. This is at f2. Um, and again, on my Nikon Z8, since this is a crop lens, 1.5, 45.7 megapixels on the Z8, when you put this lens on there, you're going to end up with around 19 and a half, more or less. I think it's 19.4, but around 19 and a half megapixels resolution compared to shooting it on a ZFC, which would just be 20.9. Imagine Nikon will come out with another APS-C body in the future that would have 24, 26, 30, whatever megapixels, and at that point it might be an advantage to shoot it on that body. But for me, for right now, it's an advantage to shoot it on Z8 because I have in-body image stabilization in the Z8, which the ZFC doesn't have, and this lens, the 75mm 1.2 from Viltrox, does not have in-body, or doesn't have image stabilization built into the lens. So for me, it's much better to shoot it on the Z8, and it handles better on Z8 anyway because it's kind of a bigger lens. So anyway, you can see here, looks really great to me. This is at f4, and this was quite a distance. So, and again, this is an image where I've added, obviously converted to black and white, but added some of this haze here, bringing up the shadows. Let me find one this one is 1.2, and this is focused here on the Subaru emblem, I believe. You see, this is direct sunlight. It was a bright sunny day. Just a tiny bit of color around the edge of the letters here in this emblem up here. I could probably get rid of that in Lightroom, but it's not a big deal to me. So this was probably one of the more natural images, with less editing. So here's a crop of that, and if I zoom in further to go to 100%, I believe somewhere in here is where I was focused. But when you get this shallow depth of field, and this is at f1.2. Let's make sure. Yeah, f1.2. Some of us may not look as sharp as it should be, but it's just, there's just not as much depth of field there. So just keep that in mind. But this does look really good to me. Color looks great. And again, color is, it's color is color. You're going to have whatever color you edit it to have. But straight out of the camera using and then importing to Lightroom, which is what I use, Adobe Lightroom, and applying one of the color camera matching profiles like standard. It starts out really well for me. And again, this is on the Subaru emblem. There's a really good shot there. And again, this is f1.8. So again, to me, looks nice and sharp. Let's go through a few more of these. This was just a crop of this image. And again, here it's so shallow that, probably these things here in the back, some of these are in focus, and it's, again, it's so shallow. Some of it is not in focus. No fault of the lens. It's just a shallow depth of field photo. But everything to me looks great. The bokeh in these photos looks great. Again, I don't see any really busy backgrounds, and this was again at 1.2 from a distance. So if I zoom in there, again, that's focused on the front of the car, I believe. And this elderberry, I think this is elderberry. This was in a park in up there near Snoqualmie Pass in Washington, up in the mountains. So this is 2.8. This is a bright sunny day. Looks really good to me. This is where I focused over here. And again, on the Z8, I'm always using AFC and 3D tracking, even for static subjects like this. So what I'll do is I'll put my focus point here, and I'll just reframe the image the way I want it. And it just makes it easier. And this lens has no issues with focusing, so that I haven't experienced any problems at all with autofocus. And again, this is 1.8. And if I zoom in 100% on that, Everything's nice and clear and sharp. And this was early in the morning. Okay, now this is a robin's nest, so it's a bird nest, and if I zoom in real close on this, this is at f2. So this is f2. So if I look right in here, this is kind of where I focused, right in here. It's just sharp as can be to me. I don't see any problem with out of focus areas. Again, the bokeh. It's one of those things where don't sharpen your backgrounds, your bokeh. Why would you ever do that? So if you're using Lightroom, make sure you're using a masking when you have really shallow depth of field photos like this to sharpen. When you're doing your sharpening, make sure you mask this. There's a slider in the sharpening section for Adobe Lightroom to basically not sharpen anything that's not in focus or in the focal plane. So really, in this image, which the sharp area is right in here. This is where I focused, and so this is what's actually going to be in focus in the focus plane. So you get over a little bit this way, and it's not in focus, and then over here, obviously, it's not in focus. So, why would you ever sharpen that part? So don't do that. You'll basically screw up your bokeh for one thing, and if you use that clarity slider in these really shallow depth of field photos, you're going to start messing up your bokeh also. So just keep that in mind when you're editing in Lightroom. But yeah, everything here looks great to me. This was, what was this at? F1.2, and this was kind of at a distance because I'm in a little observation platform off, obviously directly behind this, where this waterfall is at Snoqualmie Falls. And so that's what that is. That's 1.2 at a little bit of a distance. I can't remember if this is cropped at all. But I believe that's pretty much full resolution. Let's go back through some of these other ones. There's really not much else in here. There was one thing, this not a photo I'd normally keep. I just left it here as an example. It's just a tiny bit of green fringing here on the style. This really bright, high contrast area with like a lot of brightness on it, and then there's the black over here. But I did use the dropper from the chromatic aberration dropper on Adobe Lightroom to get rid of some of this, but there's just a tiny, tiny bit left there. But I just kind of left this as an example, kind of extreme example. But otherwise, all these other pictures, you just don't really see any chromatic aberration. That looks really good. Let's find some others. I think that's about it. Didn't really have more than a couple weeks with this lens so far, but just to give you an impression of how it looks and what I feel about it. To me, it's well worth just over $500. There's not a lens like this in the Nikon lineup for the APS-C. So there's if you want it, this is the only place you're going to get it. Lens like that, and yeah. So to me, I think it's a good option. And let's see, probably was focused here on the Twin Peaks Sheriff's Department. That's obviously fake. It's not a real Sheriff's Department. If you're familiar with the old TV show, you know what that is. Some of this is not in the focal plane, but again, that one was really nice. This is f4. So if I zoom in there, where did I focus? This is a really tough scene even for even the Nikon S-line lenses, the Z-mount S-line lenses, got all this fine detail in there. You try to zoom in on that, it's going to look a little messy in some places. But anyway, you can see here, it makes beautiful photos, really nice blown out background, really nice background blur. And, I really like this one. It's just a good example of what it can do. But again, this is the 75mm f1.2 from Viltrox. And again, it is made for the APS-C size sensor. So when you put it on a full frame Nikon Z mount camera, it is going to crop to be 1.5 times, and it's going to be looking like a 112.5mm lens. So there you go. I think, to me, I think it's it's better than, definitely a couple steps above, like the 35mm f1.8 that Viltrox made the autofocus lens for the Nikon Z mount. This is definitely quite a bit better than that. So and that other lens is not in the Pro line, but this one is. So anyway, visit my photo gallery here for this lens, and I've also got tons of other camera gear in here. Stuff that I've all owned all of this. That's what do they call that? Gas gear acquisition syndrome. But there's a reason why I bought all of these, and I sell what I don't keep to help fund the purchase of the next camera. But I've had all these, and there's a lot of sample photos in all of these galleries. So this is a Fuji X-H2, for example. But that's it. So anyway, hope you like this. If you get this lens, hope you enjoy it, because it is a nice lens. And thanks for watching.